What would you do if, on a regular workday, a simple walk in the park turned into a desperate search for answers? The feeling that something is wrong, like a distant and threatening echo, has begun to settle in me since Ben, one of the most frequent visitors to Shenandoah National Park, disappeared without a trace. The beauty of the place, with its vibrant foliage and majestic mountains, conceals a mystery that consumes me. As a ranger, I am trained to handle emergencies, but nothing could prepare me for the urgency of finding a friend who, in an instant, became just a memory. The story unfolds in a park that, due to its apparent tranquility, can deceive even the most experienced. Ben was a man of simple habits, always walking the same trails, observing nature with a fondness that few possess. However, one day he simply vanished. People often say that nature has a way of swallowing those who do not respect its rules, but I always believed it could be a safe haven, a place where life flourishes in its fullness. Now that belief begins to crumble. My search for Ben intensifies, and each passing day feels like an eternity. The sun sets, and darkness brings with it a chill that is not just physical. It is a feeling that the park, with its lush beauty, hides deep and dark secrets. The trees whisper, and the wind seems to carry voices I cannot understand. I wonder if Ben has become part of that mystery, if something or someone captured him, or if he simply chose to get lost among the shadows. The phone rings, and my supervisor's voice echoes from the other side, asking me to remain calm and continue the search. But how can I stay calm when every step I take is a reminder of what I have lost? The rescue team joins me, but as the hours turn into days, the hope of finding him transforms into a weight that suffocates me. Looking at the trails we walk together, I feel his absence like a hole in my chest. Every corner of the park echoes his name, and deep down, I know I am fighting against an invisible enemy. During the search, I begin to notice strange things. Footprints that do not belong to anyone I know. Markings on trees that seem to tell stories of other disappearances, as if the park is trying to warn me. What am I really searching for? The answer to Ben's disappearance, or the truth about what happens in the depths of this place I love so much? This dilemma torments me, and the line between sanity and paranoia begins to blur. One night, while I sift through my notes, a disturbing idea takes shape in my mind. What if Ben didn't disappear? What if he found something he shouldn't have? The park holds secrets that date back to ancient times, and legends about forest spirits and creatures that wander under the moonlight have always been present in campfire conversations. I always considered them just stories, but now, doubt settles in me like a constant shadow. As the search progresses, tension rises among the team members. The fear of the unknown hangs in the air, creating a stifling atmosphere. Every time a ranger goes out of sight, my heart races. What is happening here? Nature, which once was my ally, now seems like an adversary. The bushes close in around me, and darkness seems to be watching me, observing my every move. This place that was once my home is now transforming into a labyrinth of despair. Finally, a clue. A group of visitors claims to have seen a man matching Ben's description walking toward a restricted area of the park. Adrenaline courses through my veins as I follow the trail, each step bringing me closer to a revelation that could be both a relief and a curse. The air is heavy, and the trees seem to lean in, as if they want to warn me of what is to come. When I arrive at the indicated location, I feel a chill run down my spine. What I found was not Ben, but something much more sinister. A clearing surrounded by ancient trees, where time seems to have stopped. Remnants of campfires, personal belongings of people who disappeared, and a feeling that I am not alone. Presence in the shadows, watching, waiting. And there, among the trees, I realize that the park holds not only the beauty of nature, but also a dark side. A mystery that challenges my understanding. Thus, the search for Ben transforms into a struggle for my own sanity. What really happened to him? Is he just a few steps away from me? Or has he become yet another story to be told on cold nights? The answers are there, hidden in the darkness, and I am the only one capable of finding them. But at what cost? The park is now a labyrinth of secrets and fears, and I am just a ranger lost in my own story. The cold of the night seems to intensify as I approach the clearing. The silence is oppressive, and the only thing I can hear is my own heart beating out of rhythm. The place exudes an aura of mystery, as if the trees, with their twisted trunks, are guarding secrets that should not be revealed. The feeling that I am being watched becomes almost palpable, and adrenaline pushes me forward, even as reason tries to hold me back. As I examine the remnants left behind, I sense a presence. It's not just the evidence that other people have been here. It's something deeper, a feeling that travels across my skin like a shiver. The extinguished campfire, the charred remains of an abandoned campsite, and in the background, an object that glimmers under the pale moonlight. I cautiously approach, and upon picking up the object, I realize it's a chain with a pendant I recognize. It belongs to Ben. My heart sinks. How did this end up here? The voice of one of the rescue team members breaks the silence, calling my name. I turn quickly and see Sarah, a rookie ranger who has become a friend in recent days. She is pale, her eyes wide with fear. "You shouldn't be here," she shouts, her eyes fixed on the darkness around us. "There's something wrong with this place. It's not safe. I need to know what happened to Ben," I reply, trying to divert her attention, but doubt starts to form in my mind. What did she see? What does she know? "I heard things," Sarah says hesitantly, "whispers, and they're not just the sounds of the forest. They talk about disappearances, about those who were taken. It's not just a legend." I feel a knot in my stomach. The stories I always considered mere myths now seem to come alive. "Are you saying that Ben might have found something? Something he shouldn't have?" Sarah's expression darkens. "Maybe he awakened something that was dormant, something that doesn't settle for being forgotten." The wind blows, and the whispering of the branches seems to increase, as if the trees are joining in the conversation. Fear begins to mix with a fierce determination. I cannot allow Ben to become another one of the stories that haunt this park. But as Sarah's words echo in my mind, I realize that the search for him may lead me to uncover truths I would rather ignore. I decide we need to go back, but before I can suggest it, a shadow moves behind Sarah. She turns, and in an instant, the expression of terror on her face transforms into confusion. "What was that?" she asks, her voice trembling. I look back, my heart racing. The space behind us seems to stretch, as if we have entered another dimension. The outlines of the trees distort, and for a moment, I feel like I am about to fall into an abyss. "Let's go," I shout, pulling Sarah by the hand. But as I take the first step, an invisible force seems to hold us back, making our feet stick to the ground. The darkness deepens around us, and the shadows appear to come alive, dancing and whispering in a language I don't understand. "I can't stay here," I exclaim, but a part of me screams not to move away. What are we about to discover? Nature, which once seemed welcoming, now turns into a trap. As we struggle against this force, a figure emerges from the shadows. It's a man, his face obscured by a hood. He steps toward us, and a feeling of recognition hits me, as if I have seen him before, but I can't remember where. "You shouldn't be here," he says, his voice deep and echoing. "It's not safe. Those who stay too long are taken." "Taken?" I ask, incredulity and fear blending together. "Do you know what happened to Ben?" He hesitates, and for a moment the silence is deafening. He saw what he shouldn't have. The park is alive, and it demands a price. His words resonate in my mind, and reality distorts. What does this mean? What is the park really? I feel like I'm on the brink of a discovery, but the fear of losing control becomes overwhelming. "We need to go," I tell Sarah, gripping her hand tightly. The man watches, a look of sadness on his face, as if he knows that what is about to happen is inevitable. The presence that was holding us begins to dissipate, and we start to run. The trees seem to close in behind us, as if they want to trap us in their grasp. But as we run, a disturbing thought forms in my mind. What if I am only scratching the surface of something much larger? Something that could cost not just Ben's life, but mine as well. The search for answers transforms into a race against time. The park, with its deceptive beauty, is now a maze of secrets and fears. And what I have found here may just be the beginning of a nightmare that will unfold before me as I approach the truth. As we ran, the air around us grew denser, as if nature itself was trying to prevent our escape. The trees leaned in, their branches stretching toward us, and for a brief moment, I swore I saw faces hidden in their bark. "Don't look back," I shouted to Sarah, but a part of me was so desperate to understand what was happening that I almost gave in to the temptation. The hooded man was still watching us, his eyes shining in the darkness. "You can't run forever," he echoed, his voice reverberating in my mind in an unsettling way. The echo of his words seemed to turn into a distant lament, a warning that we were about to encounter something we couldn't comprehend. Finally, we reached the edge of the clearing, where the moonlight illuminated the path ahead of us. But even there, the environment seemed distorted, as if we were looking through fogged glass. Fear took hold of me, and a sense of despair began to creep in. "What's happening, Sarah? What did you see?" I asked, trying to ignore the growing feeling that something was about to be revealed. She hesitated, her gaze lost somewhere far away. I saw things. It wasn't just a campsite. There were symbols on the trees, marks that looked like they had been made by human hands, but they weren't. They resembled nothing I had ever seen. And the whispers, they spoke of a sacrifice, something that needed to be offered to appease the entity that inhabits this place. Her words cut like a blade. "Sacrifice? What do you mean by that?" I asked, the reality I knew beginning to crumble around me. "I don't know. There was a feeling that those people who disappeared didn't just vanish by chance. There was a pattern, something that connected them all to the park. And when you mentioned Ben," her voice faltered, and I saw the fear reflected in her eyes. "He was talking about something when we lost him, something he found in the woods." The knot in my stomach tightened even more. "What did he find?" I asked, my voice almost a whisper. "He mentioned a light, a clearing where strange things happened. He thought it was a magical place, something that could help us with our research. But what if it wasn't just that? What if he really encountered the entity I've heard about?" Those thoughts assaulted me like a storm. I not only needed to find Ben, I needed to understand what was really happening. But as the pieces of the puzzle came together, the true nature of the park began to reveal itself, and the feeling that we were being watched intensified. Suddenly, the air turned cold, and a biting breeze swept past us. The trees began to sway violently, as if an invisible force was shaking their branches. "Sarah, we need to get out of here," I shouted. But before we could take a step, a bright light erupted in the clearing, illuminating everything around us. The light pulsed, and a figure began to emerge from it. It was an indistinct silhouette, floating in the air, with eyes that seemed to penetrate my soul. "You came here seeking answers," the voice echoed, but it didn't seem to belong to anybody. It was a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "But the answers you seek are not what you are prepared to face." "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What do you want from us?" "I am the guardian of this place, and you have awakened something that was dormant. Those who venture in search of knowledge often become part of the story they seek to unravel." The figure moved, and the light intensified, revealing glimpses of distorted faces and muffled screams. "You must decide. Continue and know the truth, or turn back and forget what you saw. But remember, the choice comes with a price." I looked at Sarah, and the terror on our faces was evident. The idea of going back seemed as tempting as that of moving forward. But what would happen if I chose to stay? What if Ben was trapped in this dilemma? "If you have something to show us, then show it," I demanded, courage overshadowing fear. "We won't run." The figure seemed to hesitate, and the light around us began to pulse at a frantic pace. "Then be prepared for the cost of your curiosity," it replied, and the clearing began to distort, the space around us twisting as if we were being pulled into a new plane of existence. As reality unfolded before us, I realized that the true battle was just beginning. Whatever was waiting for us in the darkness was more than a mystery. It was a revelation that could change everything. And with each step we took, The line between sanity and madness began to blur, pulling us deeper into a nightmare from which we might never awaken. The pulsing light surrounded us, and each beat seemed to sync with the rhythm of my heart. The floating figure, now more defined, began to contort, revealing a more human shape, but its features were distorted, as if the reality around it was fading. "You do not comprehend what you have awakened," it said, its voice echoing with a tone of desperation and anger. "This place is not just a park. It is a portal, a passage between worlds." Terror started to creep up my spine, as if an invisible hand was squeezing me. "Fury? To where?" I asked, my voice faltering. The idea that we were about to cross a boundary we should not was sending me into a panic. Between those who have passed and those who are yet to come. Ben was not the first to get lost here, and he will not be the last. Those who venture beyond the clearing are drawn to the light, but end up trapped in the shadows. The figure lowered its head, and I noticed that, for a brief moment, an expression of pain and guilt crossed its face. "But we need to find him," I shouted, the need to save my friend overcoming my fear. "What do you know about him?" He approached the truth, but he was not prepared for what he saw. "What you consider a sacrifice is, in reality, a choice. A price to pay for the curiosity that brought him here. He is in danger, but not in the way you imagine." The being gestured, and the clearing around us began to change, revealing glimpses of another place. An ancient, crumbling city, filled with shadows and whispers. "The answer you seek is there." Dread and hope intertwined within me. "But how can we bring him back? What do we have to do?" I pleaded, unsure if I should trust the creature before me. "The only way to rescue those who are lost is to cross the portal and find the truth. But be warned, what you discover may change everything you think you know about the world and about yourselves." The figure began to dissolve into the light, but not before casting a deep look at me. "And the truth may not be so pleasant." And then suddenly the light went out. Darkness closed in around us, and I grabbed Sarah's hand, holding it tightly. "What do we do now?" I asked, feeling the ground beneath our feet shift unsteadily. "We have to move forward," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the fear we felt. "The only way to save Ben is to find out what is happening here." As we walked, the feeling that we were being watched intensified. Whispers began to echo around us, unintelligible words that seemed to intertwine with the wind. The clearing transformed into a narrow path leading us to a dark trail, where the trees seemed to close in on us, as if trying to trap us. With each step, the atmosphere grew more oppressive, and a sense of despair began to rise. "Sarah, do you feel this? Like something is wrong?" I asked, my voice almost a whisper. She nodded, looking around nervously. "Yes, it's like we're walking into a trap." But it was too late. The darkness thickened, and when I looked back, the path we had taken had vanished. Panic engulfed me. "We're trapped," I yelled, trying to keep calm. "No, we can't panic now." She took a deep breath. "We need to keep going. I feel like we're close." Then, as if the forest itself was responding to our despair, a scream echoed in the distance. A familiar scream. My heart raced in my chest. "Ben!" I shouted, renewed hope flooding through me. The sound seemed to come from deep within the forest, like an echo of distress. "He's here. We need to find him." We quickened our pace, following the sound, which grew more intense and anguished with each passing second. But the more we ran, the more the forest changed around us, as if it were shaping itself from our deepest fears. The shadows grew longer, and the trees became more twisted. Finally, we reached a small clearing, and there, in the center, stood Ben. He was motionless, with a lost look, as if he were in a trance. The moonlight illuminated his face, but there was something strange in his eyes, a darkness that did not belong to him. "Ben," I called, but he didn't respond. Instead, a voice echoed from his chest, a voice that was not his. "You should not have come. The truth you seek is not for you." My heart sank in my chest. The figure from before, the guardian, was not just a specter. It was now clear that Ben had become part of that place, of those shadows. He was trapped just like all the others. "Sarah, what are we going to do?" I asked, anguished. What I thought was a quest for the truth had now turned into a fight for our own survival. The clearing began to close in around us, and a new understanding formed in my mind. We were in a game much larger than we imagined, and the cost of our curiosity could be our own freedom. The heart was pounding in a frenzied rhythm, and the sight of Ben standing there, lost in a state that wasn't his, almost made me crumble. The scream that had echoed moments ago now resonated in my mind. A desperate call intertwined with the feeling that we were trapped. What I thought was a quest for truth had now turned into a tangible nightmare. "Ben," I called out again, but nothing. The figure in front of me was just a distorted reflection of the friend I knew. "You need to come back. Don't stay here." But the voice that came from his lips wasn't his. The presence that dominated him seemed stronger, older, and I realized that the light that once shone around the clearing had now become a threat. "You have no idea what you're doing," Ben's voice echoed, but his words were laced with a dark tone. "Your curiosity has brought you here, but there is no turning back. There is no escape." A wave of despair engulfed me. What could I do? I needed to rescue Ben. But how? The figure we had encountered before had warned us. The truth we sought could cost much more than we were willing to pay. And yet, I couldn't just abandon him. The urgency grew inside me, an uncontrollable impulse. "Listen, Ben, you need to fight. Fight against this," I pleaded, trying to reach what was left of his spirit. But the creature possessing him seemed resistant. It fed on our anguish, our uncertainty. The air around us was heavy, and the shadows moved as if they were dancing around us, laughing at our helplessness. My eyes fixed on Sarah, who was as paralyzed as I was. "We have to do something. What can we do?" I asked, my voice trembling. Time was running out, and despair began to turn into an internal conflict. The desire to save Ben fought against the fear of losing my own life. Maybe we need to confront the truth he saw," Sarah suggested, her voice low but determined. "Maybe if we can understand what happened, we can bring him back. But what if the truth is something we can't bear? What if it means our own damnation?" The thought of sacrificing our sanity, or even our lives, terrified me. What was hidden in the shadows of the clearing? What had Ben discovered that had made him a prisoner? "We have no choice," she replied, her expression firm. "We only have one chance. If we do nothing, he will be trapped here forever. We need to delve into this darkness, even if it means facing our worst fears." I took a deep breath, gathering the courage I lacked. I knew the path ahead could be dangerous, but I couldn't leave Ben behind. With one last look at him, still paralyzed, I said, "Let's find out what's going on." That impulse, though terrifying, was also liberating. We began to move forward, toward the center of the clearing, where the light grew more intense, as if calling to us. As we approached, the atmosphere shifted. The shadows became denser, and a nearly inaudible whisper began to fill the air. "Don't come closer. Don't come closer." The voices seemed to warn us, but Sarah's and my determination was stronger. The light pulsed, almost hypnotizing, and I knew that the answer to save Ben was there, somewhere in that blinding glow. Then a vision, an image of what might have happened to Ben, appeared in my mind. He was standing before a door, an entrance to an unknown world, and whatever was on the other side was calling to him, luring him with promises of unspoken truths. The connection was undeniable. He had crossed that line, and now the line was about to blur even more. "Ben, you need to come back. Don't let this consume you," I shouted again, but the light began to blind me. The clearing distorted, and the shadows moved more rapidly. Time was running out, and as the darkness approached, I knew we had to do something drastic. "Sarah, we need to go into the light. We need to confront what's there," I said, even as doubt gnawed at me inside. "If it's the only way to rescue Ben, we have to try." The fear of losing everything became a flame burning within me, but the determination to save my friend was stronger. "All right, let's go together," Sarah agreed, intertwining her fingers with mine. The warmth of her hand gave me a little strength, and together, we moved toward the light, ready to face whatever awaited us. In that moment, we were more than just two young people lost in an unknown world. We were the hope of a friend and the courage to face the truth, no matter how dark it might be. The light before us was almost unbearable, a brightness that burned the eyes and pulsed like a heart in frenzy. As soon as we crossed the threshold, a wave of heat enveloped us, as if we were diving into a sea of energy. The space around us warped, and in an instant, we found ourselves no longer in the clearing, but in a vast emptiness, where reality seemed to fade away. Shadows danced around us, forming grotesque figures that whispered indecipherable secrets. One of these figures, more imposing than the others, took shape before me. It was a creature made of darkness and light, with eyes that shone like stars in a stormy sky. What I saw was not just a spirit, but the manifestation of the fear, pain, and truth that Ben had encountered. "Do you dare to enter here?" The voice echoed in my mind, deep and resonant. "Do you seek the truth? The truth is a weapon, and those who wield it can be gravely harmed." "I am not afraid," I shouted, bravery mingling with adrenaline. "I am here for Ben. He does not belong to you." "Ah, but he belongs to me now." His curiosity brought him here, and the truth he discovered is the truth you cannot bear. The creature moved closer, and its penetrating gaze seemed to unravel all my secrets. I could feel the growing pressure in my chest, as if the very atmosphere were trying to crush me. "You don't know what you're saying," I yelled, my voice echoing into an endless void. "You feed on fear, on pain, but I will not let you take Ben away." The creature laughed, a sound resembling the tinkling of breaking glass. "Do you think you can save him? The truth is in his mind, and it will be your ruin. Do you want to know what happened? Then know this. The truth is that he saw what he should not have. He saw what exists beyond this world, and now he is part of it. Ben, fight against this," I called, but my friend's figure was lost in the fog that surrounded him. The shadows held him, like the claws of a monster, and I knew time was running out. "You can try to save him, but what must you sacrifice?" The entity whispered, its voice a poison in my ears. "The truth has a price, and you must decide if you are willing to pay it." I felt a wave of panic. What was I willing to sacrifice? My sanity? My life? But Ben was my friend, and I could not leave him behind. Determination grew within me, and I knew I had to confront what lay before me. Not just the creature, but the truth it represented. "I accept the challenge," I declared, my voice steady, even as doubt gnawed at me from within. "If it is the truth you want to show me, then so be it. But I will not allow you to destroy Ben." With a sudden movement, I charged toward the creature, challenging its nebulous form. The air around me twisted, and an invisible force tried to repel me, but I refused to back down. It was as if the very essence of truth were against me, but I could not hesitate. With each step, I felt the pressure increase, but also a clarity forming in my mind. "I see you," I shouted, addressing the creature, "and I will not let you deceive me." The light around me began to pulse in response, and the shadows became more aggressive, trying to encircle me. I could feel Ben's fear echoing in my mind, and it gave me strength. I remembered all the moments we had shared, the laughter and the adventures, and that became my shield. "Ben, you are with me. Fight for us," I shouted, and the light intensified, wrapping me in a comforting warmth. The shadows hesitated, and I realized my determination was affecting the creature. "You can't do this," it screamed, its voice now tense, almost in despair. "The truth is a trap," but I was not willing to back down. "The truth is freedom," I replied, and with one last cry, I surged toward the light emanating from my friend, who was now struggling to break free from the shadowy claws. With a final movement, I reached out and touched Ben. The contact was electric, a shock of energy that reverberated through us. The space around us exploded in light, and the shadows began to dissipate, screaming as they faded away. "You are free, Ben. Come back to us," I said, and the light completely enveloped us, taking us away from the darkness. When the brightness finally faded, we found ourselves back in the clearing, and the malevolent presence had vanished. Ben fell to his knees, gasping, as if he had just woken from a nightmare. I looked at him, relieved, and knew that although the truth had a price, I had fought for something worth it. The shadows could no longer bind us. The battle was won, but what we saw in the light still echoed in our minds, a reminder that the truth can be both liberating and terrifying. I found myself back in the clearing, the fresh and familiar air enveloping me like a comforting embrace, but nothing seemed the same. The sunlight filtered through the leaves of the trees, but its beauty now felt strange and distant, as if I were observing everything through a veil. Ben was beside me, kneeling, his breath still ragged, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed forever between us. You made it," he murmurs, his eyes wide, reflecting a mix of fear and gratitude. But his voice was distant, as if echoing from a place far away. It was as if, in escaping that dark dimension, something of us had been left behind. I looked at him, trying to find the words, but the battle still reverberated in my mind. The shadows, the whispers, the presence of the creature. All of it blended into a cacophony of emotions that I couldn't name. What had we faced? What had truly been revealed? "Ben, are you okay?" I asked, concern tightening my heart. He lifted his head, his eyes still shining with that distant light. "I saw things I can't forget." His voice trembled, and I knew he was referring to what the entity had shown him. Whatever it was etched in his memory, just as it was in mine. I tried to get up, but a wave of weakness washed over me. My legs shook, and a deep fatigue hit me, as if the energy I had consumed during the battle was now draining away. I looked at the palms of my hands, noting that they still trembled. The light of the clearing seemed to dance, as if it were alive, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. "Let's go," Ben said, placing a hand on my shoulder, but his expression was that of someone battling his own demons. He stood up, and I did the same, but the weight in our chests was undeniable. What had marked us in that battle was not just physical. It was an emotional scar that could not be removed. As we walked back down the trail, the silence was oppressive. The trees, once familiar, now seemed to watch us with a dark curiosity. The shadows that had surrounded us in the clearing seemed to have seeped into our hearts, and a subtle fear began to settle within me. The truth, which had been our ally, now felt like a burden. "Do you think we really won?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, and that told me everything I needed to know. "I don't know. The truth I saw, I can't forget, and I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse." He looked up at the sky, as if searching for answers in the clouds. The road seemed long and endless. Every step we took was laden with doubts and fears, as if we were being followed by those invisible shadows. Whatever we had faced, the battle was not over. It had merely changed form. We reached the point where the cars were parked, but the world outside the forest felt different. The colors were more vibrant, but there was a strangeness to them, as if a layer of fog obscured reality. The air was thick with a tension I couldn't explain. "Do you still feel like something is out there?" I asked, looking at Ben, who seemed to alter his breathing with every moment. "Yes, and it scares me," he replied, his voice choked, as if we're being watched. I looked around, and the feeling of being observed grew. Whatever we had faced had not completely disappeared. When I entered that clearing, I didn't know what I was about to discover. But now, even outside of it, the truth followed us like a shadow. As we drove away, the forest receded in our rearview mirror, but I knew that the battle we fought had changed everything. We were no longer the same. The emotional scars we carried were deep, and the questions that lingered in our minds would never be completely answered. The feeling of emptiness and loss remained, just as the certainty that the line between light and darkness was thinner than I could have imagined. And although we had escaped, I knew that the truth we had sought would always be with us, like a distant echo of a past we could never forget. As we drove, the road stretched out before us like a labyrinth of uncertainties. I felt the weight of what had happened pressing on my chest, as if the clearing were there, invisible but present in every curve and shadow that passed. The daylight illuminated the path, but there was a darkness that lingered in my mind, an echo of the truths that had been revealed to us. Then, do you remember everything that happened? I asked, trying to anchor myself in his presence. But he simply nodded, his gaze distant. There was a shadow over his expression, something that told me he was still battling the demons that the creature had awakened. Yes, and it scares me more than I'd like to admit, he replied, his voice heavy with a sincerity that made me feel a knot in my throat. The truth revealed to us in the clearing was not just about the creature, but about ourselves, our weaknesses, our fears, and how vulnerable we were in the face of the unknown. With every mile we passed, the feeling of relief at being safe was quickly replaced by a growing unease. Whatever we had faced was still within us, like a shadow that refused to fade. What had been a struggle for survival was now becoming an invitation to introspection. When we finally arrived in the city, the familiarity of the streets brought me brief comfort. But I soon realized everything felt different. People hurried by, but I felt as if we were in a world apart, as if the clearing and its truths had displaced us from reality. We need to talk about what we saw, Ben said, interrupting my thoughts. I can't keep this bottled up inside me. I agreed, but the idea of recalling everything sent a shiver through me. We had returned, yes, but what had we really gained? What if this is not the end? What if the shadow we faced is just part of something bigger? I didn't know if I was asking him or myself. The truth is that when we left the clearing, we didn't just leave a place, but also part of ourselves. There was an abyss between who we were before and who we were now. What if the battle wasn't over? What if what accompanied us was a curse and not a blessing? As we walked through the streets, life continued around us, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Fear and curiosity battled within me, and I knew that the answers to the questions haunting us were not in fleeing the truth, but in facing it. He suddenly stopped, and I followed him, the worry growing in my chest. Do you realize we might be the next generation facing this? That what we saw could come back and we need to be prepared. His words resonated within me, and for the first time, an idea began to take shape. We were no longer victims, but survivors. We had seen what many would not, and for that reason we had a responsibility. The fight was not just for ourselves, but for everyone who could be affected by that darkness. I looked at him, and determination began to blossom within me. So what do we do now? The answer lay in our unity, in facing the fear head-on and seeking the truth, no matter how terrifying it was. As we returned to the car, a new feeling began to emerge. What might have seemed like a burden transformed into a call to action. The struggle was far from over, but now we were more than just two lost souls. And so, as we looked toward the horizon, I realized that the clearing was not the end, but the beginning of a new journey. A journey that would require courage, friendship, and the willingness to confront what lay ahead. The echo of the clearing still resonated within me, but now it was an echo of hope, an invitation not just to survive, but to thrive in the face of the unknown. If you have ever felt like I did, lost between shadows and light, I invite you to share your story. What have you learned in your own battles? Together, we can find strength and clarity amid the confusion. Don't forget to like and subscribe so we can continue this journey together. What lies ahead is just the beginning, and your voice is essential for us not to be alone on this path. Let's face what comes next together. What would happen if, on a sunny day in Yellowstone National Park, I discovered that a person had vanished without a trace? The feeling that the unspeakable may be lurking among the trees is a shadow that stretches over every corner of this vast territory. As the guardian of this immense area, my duty is to protect the visitors. But what happens when the danger comes from the unknown? It was a peaceful morning, and I was doing my usual rounds through the park. The scent of fresh pine and the songs of birds made the experience almost magical. However, as soon as I spotted the group of tourists preparing for a hike, a sense of unease washed over me. Something felt off, as if the air were charged with an invisible tension. Among them, I noticed a young woman named Celeste, who seemed more anxious than her companions. As they began to move away, something inside me twisted. Intuition, that silent voice we often ignore, whispered that I should follow them. During the hike, the sunlight filtered through the tree canopies, but the beauty of the surroundings couldn't dissipate the growing unease in my chest. Celeste, with her large, worried eyes, frequently looked back, as if she were being followed by something only she could see. When we reached a fork in the path, the tourists decided to split up. Celeste hesitated, but on impulse, she chose the more isolated route. That was the last time I saw her. Desperate, I ran after her, calling her name, but the only response I received was the echo of my own voice. The silence of the park now felt oppressive, as if the trees were witnessing a spectacle of horrors. I knew that people went missing in national parks, but I always thought they were isolated cases, unfortunate accidents. Now, I was in the middle of a mystery that defied any logical explanation. Hours passed, and daylight began to fade. With every step I took, the feeling of panic increased. I had not only the responsibility to find Celeste, but also to ensure that the park, which had always been a refuge of peace and beauty, did not become a scene of tragedy. As I scanned the area around me, I realized I was not alone. A figure seemed to move between the trees, lurking at the edge of my vision. When I turned, all I found was emptiness. Night fell, and the darkness brought with it a new layer of challenges. With the starry sky above me, the feeling of being watched intensified. It was as if the park itself were guarding a secret, an unsolved mystery that could only be unraveled if I had enough courage to face it. With a flashlight in one hand and a radio in the other, I began to call for her again, hope taking over me. The hours dragged on, and the cold began to seep into my bones. As I moved a little away from the trail, I found strange marks on the ground, as if something had been dragged. My heart raced. Could this be a sign? I was about to follow those marks when I heard a scream. The sound was sharp and desperate, and it seemed to come from a nearby cave. Adrenaline surged through my body, and without a second thought, I ran toward the sound. Upon entering the cave, all I found was the echo of my own breathing. The space was tight and damp, and the feeling of claustrophobia enveloped me. But then, amid the darkness, I spotted a faint light. It was a small flashlight, abandoned. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached. As I picked up the flashlight, I realized there was something else, an object that shouldn't be there. A bracelet with Celeste's name engraved on it. Despair took hold of me. I decided to return to the trail and seek help. However, as I turned back, I noticed that the path I had taken no longer seemed the same. The trees seemed to close in around me, as if they wanted to trap me. The park, which had always been a home, was now becoming a treacherous maze. I needed to find Celeste before it was too late. The night wore on, and the feeling that time was running out was palpable. As I struggled against doubt and fear, a new determination took hold of me. Couldn't give up. The mystery of her disappearance demanded that I delve even deeper, that I confront whatever was lurking in the shadows. If there was an answer to what happened to Celeste, I was determined to find it, even if that meant confronting the very essence of the unknown. Despair began to transform into a palpable anxiety as I lost myself further in that darkness. With Celeste's bracelet in my hand, a new wave of determination consumed me. Whatever had happened to her, I couldn't let this mystery hide in the shadows of the park. When I returned to the trail, I noticed that the environment felt different. The trees, once welcoming, now seemed to lean, as if conspiring against me. The wind whispered secrets, and the echo of my footsteps sounded like a warning. Panic began to set in, and I knew I needed to act quickly. I veered off the main path, moving cautiously between the trees, trying to follow the sense that there was something more, someone more lurking. It was then that I heard voices. Approaching cautiously, I realized that a small campfire had been lit in a clearing. A group of 3 people was gathered around, talking in nervous murmurs. I hesitated, but the need for answers pushed me to get closer. As I listened to their comments, I realized they were discussing Celeste's disappearance. One of the men, an elderly ranger, seemed particularly agitated. "This isn't the first time this has happened," he said, looking at the others. "The park holds secrets that no one wants to admit. Many people simply vanish, And what we find is nothing like it seems. My heart raced. Someone who knew more than I did. I needed to join them. Excuse me, but are you talking about Celeste? I'm the park ranger, and I'm looking for her. My voice came out firmer than I expected. The three turned to me, surprised. The woman, with disheveled hair and frightened eyes, was the first to speak. You're the ranger? We saw her. The young woman was here, but she seemed different. Something wasn't right. What do you mean by different? I asked, a chill running down my spine. She hesitated, but the ranger encouraged her. She was paler, and when she looked at us, there was an emptiness in her eyes. I'm Becca, and this is Tom and old Hank. We were camping here when we saw her pass by. Then we heard screams, and she disappeared. Fear began to transform into a dark foreboding. What kind of transformation could Celeste have undergone? And what was in the shadows of the park that had changed her like this? We need to find her. Where did you see her last? I asked, trying to keep calm. Hank, the ranger, looked down at the ground, thoughtful. There's a cave east of here, a place that many avoid. They say it's haunted. I wouldn't go there, not now. But if you saw her there, maybe. The mention of the cave made my heart race again. It was the same place where I had found the lantern and the bracelet. I needed to act quickly before time ran out. Let's go, we have to hurry. If there's a chance she's there, we can't wait. The four of us began to move toward the cave. The path seemed longer than ever, and the atmosphere around us grew denser by the moment. As we approached, a sense of unease began to envelop us. Something was wrong. The nature that had once seemed vibrant now appeared to be in mourning. When we finally reached the cave entrance, the silence that enveloped us was deafening. The darkness seemed to crawl outward, as if it were alive. I turned on the lantern, and the flickering light illuminated the damp, cold wells. The murmurs of the group behind me dwindled, and a feeling of despair began to settle in. Celeste, I called, but my voice echoed back without response. Then something caught my attention. A series of marks on the ground, similar to those I had found before. They seemed to lead further into the cave. A feeling of dread washed over me, but there was no turning back now. I needed to know the truth. Come on, we need to follow these marks, I ordered, trying to sound confident for the group. As we ventured deeper into the cave, a cold draft passed by us, and I couldn't help but shiver. The lantern's light began to flicker, as if something were trying to warn us. Hank's and Becca's whispering voices became distant echoes in my mind. Reality began to warp, and logic started to fail. I no longer knew if we were searching for Celeste or if we were being pulled into something much deeper and disturbing. As we moved forward, a new sensation took hold of me, a mix of anticipation and terror. Something was lurking in the shadows, something that defied reason. The cave walls seemed to shift, and I knew the true mystery was about to reveal itself. But at what cost? As we ventured deeper into the cave, the atmosphere grew so heavy that it felt as if the air had become a dense, almost liquid substance. The flashlight flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls, as if hidden figures were moving and laughing at our audacity. The path narrowed, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, followed. Becca was right behind me, and I could hear her ragged breathing, while Hank and Tom lagged a bit further back, their worried murmurs blending with the echo of our group. I turned to them, trying to remain calm. Are you guys okay? I asked, but the truth was I wasn't either. The feeling that something was about to happen left me uneasy. I don't know if we should go on, Tom said, his voice trembling. That legend about the park, what they say about the cave, this isn't good. Hank, on the other hand, seemed increasingly absorbed. He had a strange expression, as if he were in a trance. What do you know about this, Hank? I challenged him. You mentioned secrets. What secrets are those? He hesitated, but before he could respond, a scream echoed in the depths of the cave. It was a familiar scream, and my heart stopped. It was Celeste's voice. Celeste, I shouted, my instinct pushing me forward, but Hank grabbed my arm. Wait, we can't go in without knowing what we're facing. His voice was low but firm. What if she's in danger? I retorted, trying to pull away from his grip. You don't understand. What's here? It's not just a legend. That entity, it feeds on fear. If you enter that darkness afraid, it will be all it needs to get you. Panic began to form in my chest, but determination did not abandon me. I couldn't let fear paralyze me, not now. What if Celeste was really there, suffering? I'm not afraid of her, Hank. I just want to know the truth, I replied. And with that, I broke free from his grip and started walking toward the sound of the scream. When we finally reached a new chamber, the sight before us was terrifying. The flashlight illuminated a scene that defied logic. The cave walls were covered in markings, ancient symbols that pulsed as if they were alive. In the center was a massive rock formation that seemed to have been shaped by invisible hands. And there, in front of the structure, was Celeste. She was standing still, but she was not the Celeste I knew. Her skin was pale, and her features were distorted, as if she were trapped between our world and another. Her eyes, once bright and full of life, now reflected a deep emptiness. Celeste, I shouted, but she didn't move. She just looked at me with a distant gaze. Becca and Tom were frozen. Hank, on the other hand, seemed to be on high alert. What did you do, Hank? I asked, feeling that there was more to this creaking than he had revealed. It's not me who does it. It's the cave. Chooses. And sometimes, it takes what we love most. What are you saying? My voice grew tense. You knew all of this. I only knew enough to keep away, he replied, his voice heavy with remorse. Reality began to distort even more, and a sense of claustrophobia enveloped me. The environment seemed to pulse, as if it were breathing, and the cave itself appeared to come alive, filled with murmurs and distant laughter. The shadows moved indecently, as if they were entities with a mind of their own. The feeling that the cave was alive intensified, and a chilling cold ran down my spine. I looked back at Becca and Tom, who were frozen in shock. Hank, now with wide eyes, looked as if he were struggling against reality itself. What does she want? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The air was thick with anticipation, and the shadows seemed to draw closer, as if they knew something was about to happen. Hank hesitated, his gaze fixed on Celeste. She's not the only one here. The cave, it doesn't just take people. It feeds on their memories, their fears. A sudden sound echoed through the chamber, like a distant roar, and the ground trembled beneath our feet. Celeste, in that trance-like state, began to murmur unintelligible words, and suddenly, I felt the atmosphere shift. The air grew heavier, and the flashlight began to flicker, as if it were struggling for its own survival. What is happening? I shouted, trying to understand if it was real or just an illusion created by the cave. The entity is manifesting, Hank shouted back. It might be trying to communicate through her. And then, in a moment that felt like it lasted an eternity, the marks on the walls began to glow with their own light, pulsing in a frantic rhythm. A deep, echoing voice was heard, as if the very space was speaking. You should not have come here, the voice said, and the sound reverberated through every part of my being. Every step you take brings you closer to the truth, but the truth has a price. Fear took hold of me, but there was no way back. I needed to understand what was happening. What do you want from us? I challenged, my voice trembling but determined. What do I want? The entity laughed, and the sound was like the rustling of dry leaves on a windy day. I want what you have, dear. Desire, memories, and above all, I want blood. Felt like a punch to the gut. Whatever was here wasn't just toying with our emotions. It wanted something deeper, darker. I turned to Hank, who looked increasingly terrified, and for the first time, I realized he knew more than he was letting on. Hank, what did you do? What did you bring to us? I shouted, feeling the pressure of the situation intensify. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could make a sound, a shadow projected from the rock formation, an indistinct figure that seemed to writhe and expand as it approached. Celeste's eyes became clearer, and she began to move slowly toward us. Don't touch her, Becca screamed, but it was too late. The shadow lunged at her, wrapping her in a cold embrace. Becca's scream echoed in the cave, and panic took over me. The figure was now writhing, its face distorting into a mask of terror, and I realized it wasn't just Becca in danger. It was each of us. The cave didn't just want Celeste. It wanted all of us. In a surge of impulse, I pulled out my phone, turning on the flashlight with its intense light, trying to push back the encroaching shadow. The light cut through the darkness, and the figure hesitated, as if the light were a repellent. But the entity didn't seem to care much. It began to split, and more shadows started to emerge from the walls, each one more grotesque than the last. "The light won't stop it," Hank shouted, his eyes wide. "The only way to escape is to confront the truth." The truth. What did that mean? I looked at Celeste, who was now closer, her eyes locked on mine. It was as if she was trying to connect. But there was something else, something unsettling in her gaze. Then I realized the entity was using Celeste's image to feed on our emotions, our love and fear. "No," I shouted. "You can't have her." With a desperate movement, I lunged forward, grabbing Celeste's hand. The moment I touched her, a wave of memory hit me. It wasn't just my memories, but hers as well. Visions of laughter, of moments together, of deep love. The entity was feeding on this, and I couldn't let it take control. "Celeste," I called to her, forcing her to look at me. "Fight this. You are stronger than it." And in that moment, something changed. The flashlight seemed to intensify, and as I held Celeste's hand, a connection began to form between us. The shadows hesitated, as if being repelled by a force they couldn't comprehend. Becca's scream echoed again, but now there was a new tone: determination. The cave began to tremble, and the walls pulsed in a frantic rhythm, as if the very structure were protesting against our resistance. I knew we were not just fighting for Celeste, but for all of us who had been lured into this trap. "Let's go," I shouted to Tom and Hank. "We need to fight together." The shadows began to swarm, but now there was enough light to push them away. And so, surrounded by darkness and light, we united, forming a circle around Celeste. The cave was writhing, the entity was furious, but we would not give up. "Not now. What do you want, then?" I challenged the entity, knowing this was the only way to free Celeste and all of us. "If you want fear, you will not have mine." The shadows hesitated, and I saw the light beginning to dominate. The connection with Celeste strengthened, and the truth, the one the cave feared, began to emerge. We were stronger together, and so, not knowing what the future held for us, I held tight to Celeste's hand, determined to face the darkness and uncover the truth the cave had hidden for so long. The light around us seemed to pulse in sync with my racing heart. Each beat was a reminder that time was running out, and the entity, now more furious, writhed in the shadows, searching for any weakness in our formation. I felt Celeste's warm hand in mine, and it brought me a thread of hope amid the despair. But the urgency pushed me to act, to find a solution before the cave swallowed us whole. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice tense, looking at Hank and Tom. They were as paralyzed as Becca, still enveloped by the shadow that seemed increasingly ravenous. Fear was etched on their faces, and I knew I had to do something. The pressure was mounting, and the atmosphere was about to explode. "We need to find a way to appease the entity," Hank shouted, his voice almost lost in the echo of the cave. "It feeds on our fears, our insecurities. If we can confront this, maybe we can free Becca and Celeste." His idea made sense, but doubt began to creep into my mind. What if this was just another trap? What if, by trying to confront the entity, we only strengthened it further? I looked at Celeste, and her gaze was filled with sadness and determination. The truth was, I couldn't bear the thought of losing someone else, especially her. "But how do we do that?" I asked, frustration starting to mix with fear. "How can we confront such a powerful force?" "Think of your memories," Tom interjected, his voice stronger now. "What scares you? What keeps you awake at night? If we can expose the entity's weaknesses, maybe it will dissolve." The thought of having to face my own fears was terrifying. I remembered the time I almost lost my family in an accident, the feeling of helplessness that consumed me. And there was something deeper, a fear lurking in the shadows of my mind, the fear of being inadequate, of failing those I love. I knew this entity fed on that, and it left me paralyzed. "I can't," I shouted, my voice echoing in the cave. "I can't face this." Frustration and a sense of helplessness swirled within me. As I looked at the shadow writhing around Becca, I realized this was not just a battle against the entity, but an internal struggle. I needed to find the courage to face my own demons. "Celeste, you need to help me," I pleaded, my voice breaking. "You are stronger than you think. What do you hold deep inside? What frightens you?" Her eyes sparkled for a moment, and I realized she was battling her own memories, her own insecurities. The cave was feeding on that, and if we didn't confront it, there would be no way out. I'm afraid of losing you," she whispered, and her confession cut like a knife. It was the deepest, darkest truth, and the cave seemed to react, the shadows around us stirring with the revelation. "Then let's face this together," I shouted, feeling determination swell within me. "We are not alone." With a swift motion, I pulled Celeste closer and looked her in the eye. "Remember all the good times we've had. Let's use that as our armor, as our light against the darkness." The shadow hesitated momentarily, and in the back of my mind, I realized the entity was not just an external force, but also a reflection of our own fears. We could use this to our advantage. "Come on, all of us," I said, looking at Hank and Tom. "Confront your fears." And then, one by one, we began to speak. Each confession was a blow against the entity. Hank spoke about his insecurity regarding the past, the guilt that haunted him for wrong decisions. Tom revealed his fear of being forgotten, of leaving no legacy, and each word seemed to create a wave of light, pushing the shadows away. When it was my turn, I felt an enormous weight lift from my chest. I spoke about my family, my need to protect them at all costs, and how that, in fact, made me weak. Each word that came out of me was like cutting the strings that bound me to the darkness. And as we spoke, the atmosphere began to change. The shadows, once threatening, started to recede, as if being consumed by the light generated by our truths. The cave trembled, but now it was a tremor of liberation, not despair. "We're in this together," I shouted, feeling the energy growing around us. "Our fears will not dominate us anymore." With one last effort, we joined our hands, and a bright glow emerged from our circle. The light expanded, enveloping the cave, and the shadows screamed in agony, being banished away. I knew the battle was not completely won, but we had created a breach, a chance to escape. And so, with renewed hope and firm determination, we cast one last look at the shadow still writhing, determined not to let it win. The truth made us stronger, and together we would find a way to freedom. The intense brightness we created began to expand, enveloping the cave in a halo of blinding light. But the shadow was not willing to yield without a fight. It writhed as if it had a life of its own, and a piercing scream reverberated off the rocky walls, causing my heart to race. The entity was furious, and I knew this was our final battle. "Stand firm," I shouted, but my own voice sounded distant, almost as if the words were being swallowed by the darkness. The pressure was increasing, and the feeling of suffocation intensified with every second. Becca was still under the shadow's control, and I couldn't let her become a victim of this struggle. The light we emanated seemed to have an effect, but the enraged entity began to expand, transforming into a thick, black mass that advanced toward us. It was as if the shadows wanted to swallow us whole, and I felt more and more that the light we had created was starting to waver. "Think of your truths," I shouted, trying to keep hope alive. "Remember who we are." I recalled the good memories we shared, the laughter, and the moments of happiness. This became my focus, and I realized that if I truly wanted to defeat the entity, I needed to confront it directly. Not just with light, but also with the truth it feared. "You are just a shadow," I yelled toward the entity, feeling the power of my words intensifying. You feed on our fears and insecurities, but we are more than that. The shadow hesitated for a brief moment, and I seized that weakness. I waited for the light we created to intensify, and then, with all the strength I could muster, I charged toward the darkness. I am not my fear, I declared, and the light around me shone more brightly. I am my hope, my friendship, my love. The entity writhed, almost seeming to struggle. The shadows, which once seemed invincible, now began to dissolve into small particles, like smoke in the wind. The cave trembled, and I knew the confrontation was at its peak. For a moment, I could almost hear the voices of everyone I loved. My family, my friends, they were with me, together, forming a shield against the darkness. This connection strengthened me, and I felt energy flowing through me, fueling our fight. Becca was still trapped in the darkness, and that tore at me inside. The shadows seemed to want to distract me, to make me hesitate, but I could not allow that. Becca, I shouted, anger and determination welling up inside me. We are here. You are not alone. The shadow thrashed violently, as if trying to silence my voice, but I would not give up. What was this entity but a representation of what we feared? If I wanted to free Becca, I needed to go even deeper. You cannot control me, I declared, pushing further into the darkness. I am stronger than you think. And so, with each word, the light around me grew, and the darkness receded. The shadow seemed to splinter into fragments, and I saw flashes of faces, of memories, of moments that had once felt heavy. You are just an illusion, I shouted, my voice echoing throughout the cave. And illusions can be broken. With a determined motion, I raised my hand and channeled all the light we had created, directing it at the shadow. The light exploded in a wave of energy, and the entire cave shook with the force of the impact. The entity screamed, a shrill sound that seemed to tear through the air. The shadows began to dissipate, and the scream transformed into a wail, as if the darkness itself was unraveling. I saw Becca, struggling against the invisible chains that bound her, and my heart filled with hope. The light pulsed, and I knew that if we maintained our connection, we could free her. Becca, believe, you are stronger than this, I shouted, and the light intensified again, creating a path of hope. With one last effort, we united our voices and our truths, and a wave of light burst through the cave, consuming the shadow and illuminating every dark corner. The entity, now weak, writhed and, with one final scream, disintegrated into a burst of sparkling particles that danced in the air before vanishing. The cave fell silent, and the light we created illuminated the space around us. I felt a deep relief as the pressure in my chest dissipated. Becca was free, and we were together, stronger than before. I looked at the faces of Hank, Tom, and Celeste, and a smile formed on my lips. We had faced our fears, and together, we had conquered the light amid the darkness. The cave was silent, but the echo of the confrontation still reverberated in my mind. The smell of smoke and the sensation of heat were dissipating, but the weight of the battle we had just fought still pressed down on my shoulders. I looked at Becca, now free, and saw her panting, her eyes still shining with the light we had created. But there was something more there, a shadow of doubt, a trace of the struggle she had faced. I walked over to her, feeling exhaustion wash over my body like a heavy cloak. The scars of battle were visible, not only in the marks left by the pressure of darkness, but in the deeper fissures of our souls. What we had just faced was not just an entity. It was the materialization of our deepest fears. And even though we had won, victory came at a cost. We are together, Becca, I said, trying to offer comfort. But even my words sounded fragile, as if they were a whisper against the roar of the memory of the battle. She nodded, but something in her gaze told me that the fight wasn't over. There was a sadness that hung over us, like a stubborn fog that wouldn't dissipate. I looked around. The cave, once a space of oppressive darkness, was now bathed in a soft light. But there was a void that couldn't be filled. The entity had been destroyed, but what remained of us? With an effort, I tried to stand, but the weakness was palpable. Every muscle in my body felt drained of energy. The battle had left not only physical marks, but an emotional exhaustion that made me feel vulnerable. I knew it would be a long road to recover what we had lost, and the idea that we would never be the same haunted me. When we finally exited the cave, the daylight hit us like a warm embrace, but I couldn't feel joy. The beauty of the outside world felt so distant, as if we were in a hazy dream. The sun shone brightly, but the shadow of what we had faced still followed me. What I had seen, what I had felt, I couldn't forget. I heard the laughter of Hank, Tom, and Celeste, trying to regain their composure after the emotional storm we had just experienced. But even their voices sounded distant, as if I were hearing through a glass wall. The sensation that something was missing settled in my chest. What we had achieved felt small in the face of the magnitude of what we had lost. I took a few steps forward, not exactly knowing where to go. The gentle breeze brushed against my face, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching us. Something that hadn't been completely expelled from the cave. The darkness we faced had a way of infiltrating, of hiding in the crevices of our minds. Though Becca was by my side, a part of me had been lost in the battle. The connection we had, once so strong, was now tinged with fragility. I knew that the emotional scars would remain, and the weight of what we had experienced would become part of who we were. The spirit of the entity had been appeased, but the impact of that struggle would leave us with indelible marks. The journey back home would be long, and even though we had won the battle, the war against the internal ghosts would continue. What had been revealed in us could not be ignored. Every shadow that moved at the edge of the light seemed to whisper secrets I wasn't ready to hear. As I looked toward the horizon, a feeling of emptiness settled in. The mystery was not completely resolved, and the echo of the cave still resonated in my mind. The light had triumphed over darkness, but there was a price to be paid. And as we walked toward the unknown, I realized that even in the light, the shadow would never cease to accompany me. I entered a state of deep reflection as I walked toward the horizon, each step reminding me of the weight we carried. The daylight seemed more intense, but it did not fully illuminate the shadows that nestled in my mind. As the others drifted away, laughing and chatting, I felt like a spectator in a world that continued to spin, indifferent to what had happened. Becca was by my side, but the connection that once existed between us seemed to be in tatters. The words we exchanged were superficial, as if we were avoiding the true core of the pain that bound us. What had been a battle against an external entity had now become an internal struggle, a conflict that separated us more than it united us. I looked at Becca, and the fragility in her gaze reflected my own fragility. The feeling that everything we had gone through was echoing in our hearts intensified. What was victory, after all, if we did not carry the scars with us? The cave, with its shadows and noises, seemed a symbol of what we were now. What we had achieved was not simply a victory over the darkness. It was a warning that the darkness could return at any moment, and that, perhaps, the true enemy lay within us. As we moved forward, I realized that the path home would not just be physical, but also emotional. The fight against the inner shadows would be the hardest battle, and each of us would have to face our own demons. I felt that, while the sunlight warmed my skin, the chill of doubt penetrated my being. What would come next? How could we move on knowing that the darkness could find us again? The group began to disperse, and I watched them from a distance, still immersed in my thoughts. Their laughter mingled with the echo of the cave, and I realized that, in some way, the battle had shaped us, even if we did not know exactly how. What once seemed unshakable was now in constant transformation. Light and shadow lived in an eternal dance, a duality we could not ignore. Suddenly, a scream cut through the air. One of the friends had stumbled and fallen, and in an instant, the lightness of the moment was replaced by sudden panic. I ran to help, but as I looked at my friend, I saw not just a physical fall, but the manifestation of a fear that had not been overcome. We were all on the brink of an emotional abyss, and a simple fall revealed the fragility of our new realities. Deep down, I realized that the battle was not over. The struggle for healing and understanding ourselves was just beginning. What had been revealed in us would not be easily forgotten. I may have won the battle against the entity, but the true challenge lay in facing the echoes of that day, the unanswered questions that now inhabited our hearts. As I helped my friend to stand, something changed within me. The pain and confusion, instead of knocking me down, began to transform into a form of resilience. I knew the journey would be long, but perhaps there was hope in the act of continuing. Looking at the faces of my friends, I realized we were not alone. There was strength in our unity, even when the shadows seemed to close in. And so, as we walked back, I realized it was not just the light that guided us, but also the shadow. The darkness taught us to value the light in a way we had never imagined. The future was uncertain, but the journey we were about to embark on was an opportunity to redefine what it meant to be free. I invite you, who are listening to or reading this story, to reflect on your own battles and shadows. What have you learned by facing your fears? Share your experiences and reflections in the comments. Let's explore together the lights and shadows that dwell within us. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that make us think and feel. Your participation is essential for us to continue this journey together, living and learning with each step.